So, I had a few videos in production already before this, namely the likes of Pokemon Fool's Gold, a spoiler-free Pokemon Unbound bit, Infernax, and shaving the story description off of Yakuza 0 because it bloated the video to 2 hours. And working on those is initially what I planned to do once I got back from the Windy City, but as luck would have it, once I got back, I got a nice little email saying, well, that Steam Deck I had ordered was finally ready. See, this video was always in the works, and, well, I went into the Steam Deck with tempered expectations. I didn't exactly think this was going to be the super killer AAA death machine. But, given this is a handheld Linux PC with Windows compatibility, I thought this would at least turn out interesting, perhaps make some decent video fodder. So I ordered the highest model of Steam Deck available, the 512GB model, along with the 512GB microSD, just for the maximum amount of storage that I can feasibly afford right now. I spent a decent amount of time using my Steam Deck casually as well because I wanted to make the most genuine impression video that I could, and just to sweeten things, I'm going to be using some of the games I want to use for future videos in this. Not all of these are games I want to do videos on, but you could probably put 2 and 2 together and try to guess which ones. Alright, so let's start out the video proper with Proton Experimental. That is to say, external Windows programs running through Experimental Proton. Now, I used a little bit less than 10 games as my sample size for this, so let's first put down which ones didn't work. There are 3 games, however, that did work. The least noteworthy of which I'm just going to say outright is Pokemon Type Wild, an old fan game from before the days of Pokken. Now, Prey 2006, however, is worth talking about a little bit more because it does not have controller support. However, with the Steam Deck's functionality, you can map the mouse and keyboard, and I was even able to go with the default settings for Prey. Granted, for transparency's sake, I do have to tell you all that presently obtaining a legal copy of Prey 2006 is nigh impossible. I had the thought of looking on Zoom platform, given they have Duke Nukem games from the old days, which, you know, is old 3D Realms, much like Prey, even if Prey had a different publisher. Unfortunately, they do not have this game, but hey, at least you can buy Postal 3.
This can't be good for me.
But, as you can see, Prey 2006 runs pretty well on here. Sadly, all things cannot in fact be Prey 2006, as there was one other game that worked pretty darn well on Experimental Proton. Welcome to Power Bomberman, probably one of my favorite fan games of all time. I'll keep this one short, as I can only say so much with having only myself right now, as right now jigging it to accept multiple controllers is something I don't want to do. This will probably be far less of an issue once the Steam Deck dock is released, but considering it's just a little bit too thick for the Switch dock, yeah. Using wide mode with the Steam Deck, though, might be a bit too much, though. Trust me, this looks a lot more like a clusterfuck on the Steam Deck's display itself. I know I said on Twitter that I wouldn't be mentioning this in the video, but I'm going to do it anyways and say that, that recent-ish at the time of recording leak of Duke Nukem Forever 2001, doesn't work. It stalls, hangs, and crashes on the banner, so sorry about that. So you ever have a moment where you just look through your notes and you realize you've neglected an entire genre of game? Yeah, that's the case with this, and this game's quite the weird bit of a technicality anyways. And I can guarantee you, you at least know of this game's box art because it's a fucking meme. But like, this one weird game has provided me with a decent chunk of notes for its own tangential section. Like, to start off with, yes, I'm running this externally because while it's on Steam, apparently that version is broken? Apparently, the GOG version, which I got for under $1 while working on this video, has a lot of fixes? And playing it on my own worked perfectly. I had no problems at all. I was using the touchscreen to have fun, but just when I went to record footage, you lose access to the touchscreen, which is what makes adventure games, or rather point-and-click games, work really well on this thing. And to be honest, I've had quite the varying experience using the trackpad whenever trying to record this, so... If you're wondering why you're not seeing much of the game and watching Lowry stumble around, yeah, that's why. And this is a point-and-click I actually am quite fond of, so let me segue into the next section in the most, appropriate way. So now, we gotta talk about Steam games running on the Steam Deck. You know, one of the big selling points. I am going to be leaving 2 games out due to touchscreen weirdness. Given the fact that, as I've mentioned before, trying to get it to work while recording is kind of a roulette, future video topics, Lobotomy Corporation, and Library of Ruina kind of won't be in this section, so sorry. Rest assured they do work well. As it stands, however, I'm going to split this into 3 sections. Well, a bit closer to 3.5, given I'm not the biggest fan of Western AAA games. The categories I'll be splitting these in are indie games, older games, and this will exclude any emulated releases, so no DOSBox and no Pico Interactive stuff. And lastly, I'll just dub this last part the modern section. With this all out of the way, it's time for... So unsurprisingly, the Steam Deck is an absolute monster when it comes to indie games. Even further unsurprisingly, even more so than the Nintendo Switch. I mean, hey, I finally have a portable Enter the Gungeon that isn't dropping frames like crazy. On the note of the Nintendo Switch, though, I couldn't get the homebrew port of Zero Ranger to run, but... hey, it runs on Steam Deck. In regards to running Zero Ranger, though, I'm pretty pleasantly surprised, to be honest. Like, it is absolutely one of the games that has always given me problems trying to record it, so I threw it on the Steam Deck thinking that it wouldn't work due to the weirdness. But lo and behold, it does, and it controls pretty darn well, too. Also, an obligatory go play Zero Ranger. Of course, indie titles that aren't particularly intensive work as well, like Infernax. Here's some footage of that. For me, at the least, extremely hard games like this really show how surprisingly good the Steam Deck feels when you're playing it. Like, yeah, it's not going to be comfortable to everyone's hands, but at least in mine, it feels pretty alright. If you, however, during your time with the Steam Deck, want something obscene and disturbing, let me let you in on something. Cruelty Squad is playable. The really neat thing about the Steam Deck, at least when it comes to playing stuff that otherwise wouldn't be playable on it, is that community layouts exist, and Cruelty Squad would be unplayable without one of these. Heck, I find it kind of unplayable with the community layout, and I can't really list the layout here because it's not something I should put on YouTube from the description. But despite the fact that I'm just not good enough to play Cruelty Squad on such a setup, I want to bring it up because it works and it shows what can be done with Steam Deck compatibility. Especially since it's the fine line between user-friendliness, community-friendliness, and, maker-friendliness. Now, let's play the dusk footage as I get into games that didn't work during my times trying to run stuff, or were borderline unplayable. Really, there's only 3 Steam games that completely and utterly failed on me. The first of which is Postal 2, which, considering it's one of the jankiest games running on a janky engine known as Unreal 2, yeah, that checks out that it would just crash immediately. Postal 4 also is nigh unplayable. Like, yeah, it'll run, but it hitches and stutters like crazy, which, given it's a janky Unreal Engine 4 game, yeah, not surprising. And the last game that I ran that was borderline unplayable was Herot. Yeah, this one's also unsurprising given what it's running on, which is an engine entirely made in Pascal, and is kind of like super refined jank. And with this wrapping up all of the indie Steam games, I feel it's finally time to move on to... Alright, so older games on Steam that are still being sold through it. This one's going to be one of the shorter sections of the videos because, well, most of the games wind up getting remastered by Night Dive. It's Night Dive. Regardless, there's only a couple of games to know, and this is more concerning the early 2000s and back. Now, you've likely noticed I'm using Valve's own Half-Life as the filler footage for this, because, well, it's probably the most stable you're going to get of an experience. If you're wondering what an unstable experience would look like on this, well, let's take a look at Shogo, and, epilepsy warning. All of the epilepsy warnings. I'm even going to put it on the screen because, yeah, there's a reason why I made this one quite a bit shorter. Yeah, if it's flashing every time I fire guns, yeah, no. I also considered Daikatana for this, but I didn't feel masochistic enough the day I was recording all this footage. But at the end of the day, if you want to play Jank Perfected, you can play Deus Ex. Like, I know I'm showing only the training course, but it does combine a lot of what I love about the Steam Deck, especially since, of course, there's layouts for it. Because while it's still clunky, which, given that Deus Ex is janky, it just kind of makes it fit it a bit better, you know? Now, there is no way I want to play through this whole game on the Steam Deck. Not even for this video. So, I'm going to end this here and get to the juicy bits of... Regardless, running older games off of Steam is kinda 50-50. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it works, but do you really want to run it like this? With this all out of the way, though, I think we should transition into modern-ish games. So yes, noting that some of my games in this section are 10 plus years old, this is just mid-2000s and beyond. I don't think I have to say this, but for people who don't know how this sort of thing works, the more intensive a game is, the more it will impact battery life in this case. So yeah, with that in mind, I'll give some brief thoughts on running modern-ish games. And to be honest, I've been having quite a lot of fun with this thing. Just with the currently playing Sonic Generations footage and the Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition footage that will be playing, yeah, you could certainly tell I've gotten my mileage out of this already. There are quite a few games I've been enjoying on this that I'll put into a montage, but I will say that there is one singular game that did not work in this category in my testing. The game that would not run is Sonic Forces, which, it's a terrible game, so nothing of value lost. But before we get to the big star and the subsection of this, let's get to that montage. You know what though? I want to pick one relatively recent big game from the AAA industry that I don't hate, just to see how it runs. If only one of those existed. One of the ones with the performance monitor too. Oh right, I have one of those. In a move that will surprise no one, my more recent AAA game for this is obviously Doom Eternal. And as you can see, during firefights it works pretty damn well actually. Using twin-stick controls isn't exactly my preferred method of controlling a game as brutal as Doom Eternal, so I've dropped the difficulty down a bit, but hey, you can see the results right here. While it never drops below 30 frames per second, I will note that frames drop during more intensive areas like right here. However, it is still playable, and I will say that, you can at least see the results on the screen. With Doom Eternal, it does let me talk about one of the admittedly situational downsides of the Steam Deck. See, fun fact for a lot of non-Americans, a lot of Americans do not have very good internet, and I am no exception. I'm looking to rectify this for next year, but until that time comes, downloading such a large game like Doom Eternal kinda feels like... So yeah, as you can imagine, that took quite a bit to get this stuff all dealt with. As a little bit of a segue though, at least our connection is good enough to do online games. I've had a pretty interesting mixed experience with online gaming on the Steam Deck. And I will say for, well, transparency, I've only tried it with 3 online games, but I am willing to admit that others may have a more positive or more negative experience than me. Let's start with the most positive though, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Since I got back into Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently, so of course I'm playing Master Duel, which, this is more about how it plays on the deck right now, and, well, it's good. No, it's really good. The exception was purely when recording it, because recording makes the touchscreen do unpredictable things, and in this case it gave it the accuracy of that pulse stretched by stream from earlier. With that one single exception though, this is unironically my favorite way to play Master Duel. Hands down, no contest. On the other hand, the other two were kind of rough experiences, to be honest. Team Fortress 2 is a little bit odd in the respect that it's probably not the game itself, but rather the fact that I'm playing on the Steam Deck and pubs are pretty much unusable right now. So pretty much I had to turn to servers like Uncletopia, which is normally full of pretty decent players. While thanks to playing this on the Steam Deck, I had a rather significant handicap. Regardless, with this bit, since I have a lot of nostalgia for TF2, I put my all into it, to be honest. I went with all the classes I used to play when I played it back on PC. Playing Engineer on the Steam Deck, to be quite honest, was extremely miserable. There's just no other words to describe the experience of trying to play Engineer on the Steam Deck, or any controller for that matter. It's just so clunky. If you decide to not yee another haw, well, every other class works pretty well on this, to be honest. There's still gonna be a bit of clunkiness, but in the end I think I could get used to something like this, genuinely. Most of the problems I likely had with this were more of the I played with a bunch of pretty decently skilled players while debilitating myself with controller controls for the first time. Yeah, that kind. To be honest though, I'd rather have played against skilled players in stuff like the bot-infested public servers or the cheater-infested high tower servers. Which brings us to Unfortunate Spacemen, which, no, it doesn't work well on the deck at all. I tried. I really tried. The game itself I like. I want to put more time into it at some point, but it just feels like utter rubbish on the Steam Deck. Maybe somebody could make a layout that would work for it and it'd be a lot better feeling, but no, that was not my experience with it at all. It is a sterling example of a game that is better played on PC instead of the deck. I hate to say this, but that's just what my experience was with this. However, I know everyone I know will be quite disappointed with this video unless I talk about a very specific thing you can do with this. It is quite frankly time to discuss what is seen by some as a very filthy word. It's time for emulation. So, with regards to emulation, let's start off with the most obvious one, Steam's own version of RetroArch. I will state that for the record, adding cores to this version of RetroArch is kind of a pain because you have to treat each core as if it's DLC. To say it is clunky would be an absolute understatement. I use the GBA and N64 cores the most, so the footage that you see is going to be from those. There's not much else to say about RetroArch on Steam. After all, I'm mainly including it for completion's sake. While the rest of the programs will be the Linux versions of specific programs, I will state right off the bat that there are a couple I'm not going to include. This would mostly be Wii U and Switch emulation, mostly because I'm a small creator and I do not want my channel absolutely blasted by Nintendo's overzealous lawyers. I will, however, do Dolphin. Now, Dolphin, I don't need to spend too much time on, but issues with it are pretty rare, to be honest. Really, the only thing I can say is more about the footage itself. And that pretty much comes down to the fact that when I'm recording other hardware, I sometimes screen share it for others. I do keep all other audio muted for privacy's sake, and mostly this just means that I have a lot of Pokemon channel footage thanks to someone close to me. Terrible segues aside, let's get into that footage. Now, the last two Nintendo systems that I'm grouping together are the 3DS and the DS. Running 3DS games via Citra is just going to be background footage because, as you can tell, it just doesn't run very well. It'll go from running smoothly to just stuttering and crashing and just all sorts of jank. DS, on the other hand, which has two ways to run it, is actually really good. With either Desmoom via RetroArch or Melon DS, you'll have a pretty good experience with it. Melon DS is extremely clunky to set up, but once you get it going, it runs extremely well. But for most of the ease of use stuff, RetroArch's Desmoom also works well. On that note, I am using Desmoom for the footage for the sake of cleaner footage. Now, I'm going to skip PPSSPP, or as I'm going to call it, Piss Poop. mostly because it will run well enough on a toaster. Now, what I will cover is PCSX2, a PS2 emulator that has recently had Vulkan support added. Now, this is the emulator that I have admittedly spent the least time with, but I had no real issues. Maybe a hitch up every now and then, but 9 out of 10 isn't bad, right? Regardless, I still have footage, so cue the montage. So PS3 using RPCS3 is where things get interesting and varies a lot more by the game you're trying to run. This is one that I can't exactly just montage away. The game you're seeing right now, Drakengard 3, still runs better than stock hardware, even if it still does drop frames every now and then. But then you try to run a lower spec game like Tokyo Jungle and it's just like...
Let the light into your life. I am no longer acting.
With that little bit of shitposting out of my system, it is honestly mind-boggling what works and what doesn't on this, especially when you compare it to Windows RPCS3. But then you have cases like Guilty Pleasure 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. By no means should this game stutter and hitch as much as it does, but it does. And in this case, you know, it's just kind of a shame because this game is over the top in the best and most brain-dead way possible, and I love it. And I don't know how much of it can be attributed to the Steam Deck itself, or the Linux version of the RPCS3 emulator. But to contrast a game running jankily like that, then you have Tales of Xillia 2, which runs butterly smooth. Which, you know, is fine. Portable Xillia 2 is absolutely something I'm fine with, but it's just so inconsistent that it's mind-boggling. You also just have weirdness with games like Time and Eternity just working completely fine, but the HUD is gone in battles! Huzzah, I guess! But unfortunately, the game that runs the worst is another guilty pleasure of mine. One that I would unironically like to have on the go. That would be Yakuza Dead Souls. Again, I don't know if it's the Steam Deck or just the Linux version of this emulator, or both, or what, but that's just how it works, and you can clearly see how it, air quotes, works on the screen. But when the game works on this, whichever game you run on this, ooh, does it feel good. And that was the Steam Deck, and I'm not gonna lie, I really love this thing. There's a few times I'm going to be going out of state this year, and hell yeah, I'm bringing this along. I did skip over a few things, as I mentioned, with Library of Ruina and Lobotomy Corporation. Not having mouse support with that kind of makes it way too clunky to play for footage. In addition, there's stuff like Graze, the GZ Doom-based build source port, GZ Doom itself, and stuff like Sonic Roboblast 2 and other such fan games that I neglected. So the question becomes, where am I gonna go from here in terms of video production? And, well, while my Vegas folder looks like this, I think that right now the best choice for me is to focus on a couple of small, really small, vanity projects. Aside from the fact that I have proofreaders that very generously give their time to make sure that I haven't made any big mistakes here, I am kind of a one-person team, just learning this as I go along. And both inside and outside of production, a lot has gone wrong during the production of this. On the inside production end, to the point where I was considering seeing if I could just break apart one of my Switch docks and just use that to record this. Regardless, I apologize that this took so long to even make, and I thank everyone, viewers and especially my own little team of proofreaders, for bearing with me. hopefully you'll all bear with me for the next video, which hopefully should take nowhere near as nightmarishly long to make.